This series of videos covers Oracle PL SQL. It's intended for beginners just learning the language as well as seasoned developers looking for a review or to learn the new syntax. All of the examples are simple and straightforward, and we're careful not to make things too complex. First section we're going to cover is the basics of PL SQL, including block structure, which is your begin-end block, variables, including scalars and array variables, and we'll talk about loops. Next up is a very important topic, which is error handling. In PL SQL, errors are actually referred to as exceptions. We're going to show you how to use the predefined ones as well as create a few of your own. Next chapter, we're going to show you how to query data out of a database and into a PL SQL environment using all kinds of cursors, including reference cursors, nested cursors. And we're also going to review bulk fetch operations. And then we're going to talk about data manipulation language. That includes inserts, updates, deletes, and merges. We're going to talk about how to do the basic operations of each, as well as bulk operations and returning clauses from some of the DML operations. Last but not least, we're going to talk about a very important subject, which is handling exceptions and saving them as well. Moving on, we're going to talk about code that's actually stored in the database, starting with database procedures. Moving on to database packages, including specifications and bodies, with a big discussion of public versus private variables maintained within an Oracle session in a package. We'll talk about database triggers, which fire when you perform database operations such as DML or DDL. And last but not least, we'll talk about database functions and their many varieties, including result cache functions, table functions, pipeline functions, parallel functions, and streaming functions. It's also important to know how to compile your code in order to make it really fast and run effectively. So a chapter on compilation, we're going to discuss inquiry directives, which you can use to put messages in your code. Conditional compilation, which you can use to compile code to only be included in certain environments. And we're also going to talk about the optimization level, which can allow Oracle to optimize your code for you when you compile it. Another important facet of PL SQL is the ability to assess your code at compile time. We're going to look at PL SQL warnings, which is simply allow you to do a code review. You can choose to abide by the review findings or simply ignore them. We're going to look at PL SQL Profiler, which will tell you where all the time goes when you run your code. It's a very handy feature. PL SQL Trace feature allows you to figure out what code calls what other code, which is very handy if you have reams and reams of code to debug. PL Scope allows you to figure out where your variables are used, or more importantly, not used in your code. The topic of security is becoming more and more important with databases as they're exposed more and more to more usage, especially on the web. We're going to talk about invoker and definer rights and their usage. We're going to talk about granting code privileges to database roles. We're going to discuss the accessible by feature, which allows you to state exactly which code is allowed to call other code. We're going to discuss the inherit privileges feature, which is a very important thing to understand. And we're going to talk about bequeath views, which allow views to take on the current user or invoker definer rights from the calling code. And then we're going to talk about secure application roles, which allow you to provide another layer of security of access to your application. Two small topics we're going to cover very lightly near the end is dynamic SQL using the execute immediate statement. And then we're going to talk about data definition language, also known as DDL, in PL SQL. The two last chapters, we're going to talk about transactions and how to handle them and interact with any transaction errors in PL SQL. We're going to talk about the basic read committed transactions, which is what you get by default in Oracle. Then we're going to talk about serializable transactions, which you might want to use, and autonomous transactions, which I'm sure you're going to find a way to use because they're very handy. Then we're going to talk about save points. And last but not least, the final chapter, we're going to talk about PL SQL in SQL. For many years, as the name suggests, SQL has been involved heavily in PL SQL. Now the tables are slowly turning to where PL SQL is actually bleeding into SQL.